beneath the heat of an ancient Mesopotamian sun, where the twin rivers of the Tigris and Euphrates whispered through a land of dust and gold. A story was carved not on paper, but in clay. This story, older than any empire, older even than the pyramids, carries with it the heartbeat of the world's first great civilization. Sit back, relax, and listen as we step into the cradle of humanity, where gods walked beside kings and men sought immortality in the shadow of death. This is the story of Gilgamesh the king who defied heaven, befriended a wild man, and searched for life eternal. To hear his tale is to peer through the mist of 5,000 years into the very soul of what it means to be human. Uruk was his city, its walls gleaming with baked brick and pride. It rose from the earth like a promise massive, untamed, alive. Within those walls reigned Gilgamesh, 2/3 divine and 1/3 human. His strength was unmatched, his beauty radiant like the dawn. But power is a strange thing, it consumes those who hold it too tightly. Gilgamesh ruled with a hand so heavy that the people trembled at his name. He took what he wanted, defied the gods, and left his subjects pleading for mercy. And yet, beneath his arrogance, something restless stirred a hunger that no victory could satisfy. The priests prayed to the heavens for deliverance, and the gods, in their silent councils, listened. From clay and divine breath, they shaped a rival, a mirror man born of the wilderness named Enkidu. His hair was wild like the fields, his body clothed in the dust of the earth. He ran with gazelles, drank from rivers, and knew nothing of cities or kings. But fate was already moving, quiet and deliberate, drawing these two beings toward each other. One born to rule, the other born to balance him. The story of Gilgamesh does not begin in peace, nor end in triumph, begins with a challenge to power, and with a question that still echoes through time. What does it mean to be human when even gods can die? And so the winds shift, and the clay tablets whisper their first secret of a man who was a god, and a god who longed to be human, in the wilderness beyond Uruk, where reeds swayed like whispers and the horizon shimmered with heat. Enkidu lived untouched by civilization. The animals accepted him as one of their own, and his footsteps left no mark upon the earth. He was innocence incarnate, a creature of balance, neither cruel nor ambitious, but utterly free. Yet freedom, the gods knew, cannot exist untouched by order forever. One day, a hunter spotted him, this wild figure drinking at a watering hole, freeing beasts from traps, undoing the work of men. Terrified and awestruck, the hunter fled to Uruk and told Gilgamesh of this strange being who defied his hunts. The king, intrigued but insulted that such a creature dared to challenge his will, ordered the temple priestess Shamhat to tame him not by force, but by a lure. She set out into the wild, carrying not weapons, but the quiet power of civilization itself. For 6 days and 7 nights, she lay with Enkidu, awakening in him the human spirit desire, curiosity, and the longing for meaning. When it was over, the animals turned from him. He called to them, but they fled. Something within him had changed irrevocably. He felt the pulse of thought, the ache of separation. And so, guided by Shamhat, he began the journey toward Uruk, the city that would define his destiny. As he entered its towering gates, the noise of the streets struck him like thunder. The smell of bread, the clatter of metal, the hum of countless lives, it was overwhelming. But beneath the awe, a new purpose began to stir. The people of Uruk whispered of their king's arrogance, of his unending demands, and Enkidu felt the call of justice in his blood. When Gilgamesh sought to exercise his divine right upon a newlywed bride, Enkidu stepped forward, barring his path. Their eyes met to forces of nature colliding. The air itself seemed to tense, as if the city held its breath. What followed was no mere fight, but an elemental clash, power against power, will against will. Dust rose in clouds, stone cracked beneath their blows, and the streets became an arena for the gods' amusement. Yet as they grappled, locked in a storm of fury, something unexpected occurred. Neither could best the other. Strength met strength, and for the first time, Gilgamesh saw not an enemy, but an equal. The fight ended not in victory, but in understanding, and from that understanding, a bond was born, one that would carry them through battles, triumphs, and the darkest reaches of existence. Their friendship became legend, but destiny, patient and merciless, was already waiting beyond the horizon. The city of Uruk had never known peace like this. Its restless king, once feared for his cruelty, now walked its streets beside the wild man who had tamed his spirit. Gilgamesh and Enkidu became inseparable two halves of one story. Together they hunted, trained, and dreamed of glory that would echo beyond the span of mortal life. The people watched in awe, whispering that perhaps the gods had sent Enkidu not to punish Gilgamesh, but to awaken him. Yet for Gilgamesh, the stillness of peace soon grew unbearable. He hungered for greatness, for deeds that would make his name eternal. One night, beneath a sky thick with stars, he turned to Enkidu and spoke of the cedar forest, the forbidden realm guarded by a monstrous being placed there by the god Enlil. "Let us go there," Gilgamesh said, his eyes alight with divine ambition. "Let us slay Humbaba and carve our names into the trunks of the sacred trees. Let the world remember that we defied fear itself." Enkidu hesitated. He had once roamed the wild places and knew the power of that guardian, a creature whose roar could shake mountains and whose breath could scorch the air. "My friend," he said softly, "Humbaba's voice is fire, his teeth are death. To challenge him is to challenge the gods." But Gilgamesh, driven by the fever of destiny, refused to listen. "We were not made to live and die like animals," he replied. "If we must perish, let it be in pursuit of greatness." And so Enkidu, bound by friendship and fate, agreed. The two heroes prepared for the journey, crafting mighty weapon swords forged from the finest metals, axes that gleamed like lightning. The elders of Uruk blessed them with trembling hands, and the priests poured sacred oil upon their heads. As they stood at the city's gate, Shamash, the sun god, cast his light upon them. "Go," his voice seemed to say in the rustle of the wind. "But remember that pride carries its own price." Together they marched into the wilderness, where shadows stretched long across the earth and every sound seemed to whisper of danger. The forest awaited them, ancient and vast, its heart pulsing with the breath of the gods. And somewhere within it, Humbaba waited, a living embodiment of terror and divine wrath. The road ahead would test not just their strength, but the limits of their courage and the meaning of their friendship. The journey to the cedar forest was long and unforgiving, a path that stripped away comfort and revealed the raw truth of endurance. Days bled into nights as Gilgamesh and Enkidu pressed forward, their feet sinking into the hot dust of ancient plains. The wind carried strange voices, whispers that seemed to rise from the bones of the earth itself. Each morning they awoke to the cries of unseen beasts, and each night they built fires to keep the dark at bay. But through every hardship, their bond deepened, forged by the shared rhythm of survival. Gilgamesh, once the proud ruler who commanded others to suffer in his stead, now learned what it meant to struggle beside another man. Enkidu, who had once known only freedom, now felt the strange pull of loyalty and destiny. As they neared the great forest, its silhouette began to dominate the horizon, a wall of towering cedar trees, their tops lost in mist, their trunks ancient as the gods who planted them. The air grew thick with resin and mystery, heavy with the scent of sacred wood. They stopped before the forest's edge, and even Gilgamesh felt a tremor of doubt. The silence within was not the silence of peace, but of watchfulness, as though the trees themselves were aware of the intruders. Enkidu placed a hand on his friend's shoulder. "Do you feel it?" he murmured. "The heartbeat of something older than our kind." Gilgamesh nodded, but stepped forward anyway. "Fear is the first gate we must pass." They entered the forest, and the world seemed to change around them. Sunlight filtered through thick canopies and fractured beams, casting golden patterns on the moss-covered ground. Every step echoed with the creak of age. Every breath carried the faint sound of a growl that was not quite wind. Then, as dusk began to fall, the earth trembled. A distant roar rolled through the trees, shaking leaves from their branches like rain. Humbaba had awoken. His voice was like thunder wrapped in rage. "Who dares disturb the forest of the gods?" he bellowed, his words rumbling through the soil. Gilgamesh raised his axe, but Enkidu's hand trembled. "It is not too late to turn back," Enkidu said, though his own heart knew retreat was impossible. The shadows deepened, and from them emerged the guardian himself, Humbaba, monstrous and magnificent, his face a shifting mask of smoke and fire. His very presence bent the air, and the trees bowed as if in reverence. The heroes stood frozen, the weight of divine fury pressing upon them. The battle they had sought was about to begin, and the world itself seemed to hold its breath. The roar of Humbaba split the air like the tearing of the sky. The ground beneath Gilgamesh and Enkidu shuddered, as though the very forest recoiled from the power of its guardian. The monster's eyes burned with a terrible brilliance, twin, sons of rage and divine purpose. His breath rolled across the glade like fire, bending trees and blackening the grass. Even the wind seemed afraid to move. Gilgamesh gripped his axe tighter, the pulse in his wrists echoing the thunder in his chest. Shamash, god of the sun, watched from above, and his light pierced through the canopy in sharp, flickering shafts, as if guiding the heroes toward their fate. Enkidu's voice, hoarse but steady, broke through the tension. "Do not falter, my brother. Remember why we came to defy fear, not to worship it." His words steadied Gilgamesh's hand. Together they charged. The first clash was like a storm meeting a mountain. Humbaba's blows were immense, shattering the earth where they landed. His laughter a deep, echoing growl that rattled the leaves. Gilgamesh darted in and struck, but his blade barely grazed the creature's bark-like skin. Enkidu leaped to his side, swinging his axe with the strength of a beast born of wild lands. And this time the blow drew ichor, a glowing golden essence that hissed where it spilled. Humbaba howled, the sound rippling through the forest like a living wave. Trees cracked, birds fled in terror, and even the air grew heavy with dread. But the heroes fought on, driven not by courage alone, but by the strange union of their spirits, one forged in civilization's order, the other in nature's freedom. They moved as one body, each anticipating the other's strike, each protecting the other's weakness. Finally, as Humbaba faltered, Shamash sent 7 mighty winds to bind the guardian's limbs. The creature fell to one knee, his immense shadow quivering. Gilgamesh raised his axe for the final blow, but hesitation clouded his mind. Humbaba's voice softened, no longer thunder, but sorrow. Mercy, great king. I was made by the gods to protect this forest, not to harm man. Spare me, and I will serve you. The forest fell silent, waiting for Gilgamesh's decision. Enkidu, his face hard with grim wisdom, whispered, "Do not listen. If you let him live, he will rise again and destroy us both." The choice weighed heavily, the mercy of kingship against the necessity of survival. Gilgamesh closed his eyes, then swung the axe. The blow landed, and Humbaba's roar faded into the wind, his body collapsing into the roots of the forest he had guarded. The sky dimmed as if mourning the fall of something ancient. The heroes stood in the silence that followed, victorious yet uneasy. For in the stillness they felt the unseen gaze of the gods, and in their triumph, the faint scent of divine anger. When the deed was done, Gilgamesh and Enkidu stood before the carcass of Humbaba, its vast form sinking slowly into the soil, as though the forest itself sought to reclaim what had been taken from it. The once vibrant cedar grove seemed muted now, its life dimmed by the death of its guardian. The scent of sap and smoke mingled with the metallic temps of divine blood, and the wind carried a low hum, ancient lament that only the trees could sing. Enkidu's eyes were fixed on the fading glow of Humbaba's wounds, his expression unreadable. "The forest dies with him," he said quietly, almost to himself. "We have slain not a monster, but a spirit." Gilgamesh, still gripping his axe, stared at the ruin before him and felt an unfamiliar weight press against his heart. "We came for glory," he muttered, "and now it tastes like ash." The voice of Shamash echoed faintly through the canopy, neither approving nor condemning. "You have done what men must do when faced with the impossible. Yet know this, every victory draws the eyes of the gods, and they are not kind when their balance is disturbed." The words lingered, heavy and distant. Gilgamesh turned to Enkidu. "We will take the cedars back to Uruk," he said, forcing purpose into his tone. "The walls I build shall touch the heavens. Our names will never fade." Enkidu nodded, but his silence spoke of unease. As they journeyed back, carrying the carved timbers on rafts down the slow current of the river, the world around them seemed to mourn. The birds no longer sang, the beasts hid in the shadows, and the sun's warmth felt hollow. One night, as they camped by the riverbank, Enkidu awoke from a restless sleep and gripped Gilgamesh's arm. "I dreamed of Humbaba," he whispered. "He stood before me, and behind him were the 7 gods of judgment. Their faces were veiled, but their eyes burned with wrath. One spoke and said, 'The axe that felled the cedar shall one day fall upon its wielder.'" Gilgamesh's gaze darkened, but he brushed the words aside. "Dreams are the whispers of fear," he said, though his voice betrayed doubt. Yet even as he spoke, lightning flickered on the horizon, and thunder rolled across the sky, not as a storm, but as a warning. The river's flow quickened, and somewhere beyond the mountains, the gods began to stir. When Gilgamesh and Enkidu returned to Uruk, the people greeted them with songs and garlands, praising their courage and the cedar wood they brought back from the divine forest. The city rejoiced, but the air around the heroes seemed touched by an invisible shadow. Gilgamesh stood before the towering gates of Uruk, the scent of cedar thick in the air, and for a moment even victory felt hollow. The gods watched from above, and one among them, Ishtar, goddess of love and war, found herself captivated by the strength and beauty of the king. She descended from her high place in the heavens, her eyes burning like twin stars, and approached Gilgamesh amid the celebrations. "Mighty king," she said, her voice smooth and deadly as honey, "you have defeated the guardian of the cedar forest. Be my husband. Let us share the throne of heaven and earth. I will give you riches beyond counting, power beyond measure, and the love of a goddess." The crowd fell silent, but Gilgamesh's laughter echoed through the courtyard like a blade cutting through silk. "Love of a goddess," he mocked. "You who betrayed Dumuzi and sent him to the underworld. You who destroy every man who falls into your arms. No, Ishtar, I have seen the fate of those who please you, and I will not be one of them." His words were cruel and sharp, and Ishtar's face twisted from desire into fury. She rose into the sky, her voice like thunder, and screamed to her father, Anu, "Send the bull of heaven to punish him. Let him feel my vengeance." Anu hesitated, for the bull of heaven was no mere beast, it was a weapon of divine wrath, its breath famine and its hooves ruin. But Ishtar's rage was relentless, and at last he relented. The earth cracked open outside the walls of Uruk, and from the depths emerged the bull, massive and shimmering with divine fire. It bellowed once, and the rivers ran dry. It stomped the earth, and 1,000 men fell dead. Panic swept through the city as the creature advanced, each step trembling through stone and flesh alike. Gilgamesh and Enkidu looked upon it from the palace walls, knowing what they faced was not merely a test of strength, but a challenge from the gods themselves, a challenge that no mortal could truly win without paying a price. The bull of heaven roared, and its breath turned the fields of Uruk to dust. The ground split open as fountains of steam erupted beneath its hooves, and the sky darkened with a storm of ash. The people screamed and scattered like leaves in the wind, while Gilgamesh and Enkidu armed themselves with the weapons that had once slain Humbaba. The two friends stood side by side, their shadows long against the trembling earth. As the bull's eyes glowed with divine rage, "We must strike together," Enkidu shouted over the storm. "If we fail, all of Uruk will perish." Gilgamesh nodded, though his gaze held the weight of something deeper. He understood that this was not a battle against flesh and bone, but against the will of heaven itself. The bull lunged, its horns tearing through the stone of the city's outer walls. Enkidu leaped aside, gripping its tail with the strength of 10 men, while Gilgamesh rushed forward, driving his sword deep into its neck. The creature bellowed, shaking the heavens, but it did not fall. Blood thick, golden, and divine splattered across the earth. The scent was intoxicating, almost holy, and it made the sky quiver. With a final cry, Enkidu wrenched the bowl backward, giving Gilgamesh a moment's opening. The king raised his axe high and brought it down upon the beast's skull with a sound that silenced the wind. The bull collapsed, its body dissolving into steam that drifted upward toward the heavens, as if returning to its maker. The city erupted in both awe and terror, for they knew the gods would not let such defiance go unpunished. Ishtar appeared atop the walls, her eyes burning with grief and fury. "You have slain my bull," she shrieked. "You have offended the heavens." Gilgamesh lifted his gaze toward her and, in an act of defiance that would echo through eternity, hurled a piece of the bull's thigh toward her. It struck the ground near her feet, staining the sacred stones with divine blood. "If you wish for vengeance," he said coldly, "then come and take it yourself." Ishtar screamed and vanished into the sky, and for a fleeting moment all was still. But Enkidu's laughter faltered. He clutched his chest, trembling, his breath growing shallow. "Brother," he whispered, I have seen a vision, the gods have judged us. One of us must die for this. The wind answered him like a sigh, and the stars above flickered as though the heavens themselves agreed. That night, as the city of Uruk slept in uneasy triumph, Enkidu awoke from a dream that felt heavier than life itself. He sat upright, sweat gleaming on his brow, his chest rising and falling as if some invisible hand still pressed against him. The moonlight through the palace window painted him in silver, and Gilgamesh stirred beside the dying embers of their hearth. Another dream? Gilgamesh asked quietly. Enkidu nodded, his voice trembling. I stood before a council of gods, Onu, Enlil, Shamash, and Ea. They were angry. Enlil's voice thundered above all, for killing the bull of heaven and Humbaba. One of these mortals must die. I tried to speak, but my mouth was filled with dust. Then they pointed at me. Silence filled the chamber, deep and suffocating. Gilgamesh's eyes hardened. No, it was I who led us into battle. If punishment is due, let it fall upon me. Enkidu smiled faintly, a shadow of his former strength flickering across his face. You are the king, Gilgamesh. The gods need you to bear witness to their justice. They take the wild man instead. Over the days that followed, Enkidu's strength faded like a candle in wind. His body weakened, but his mind burned brighter, haunted by visions. He spoke of the underworld, of a place where the dead sat in darkness, clothed in feathers, drinking from clay. He saw kings of old crouched among beggars, all equal beneath the same endless dust. The gods, he whispered, they are not what we thought. Their justice is neither mercy nor cruelty is order. Gilgamesh refused to accept it. He prayed to Shamash, offered sacrifices, poured wine on the temple floors, and begged the heavens to change their decree. But no answer came. The stars above Uruk seemed cold, indifferent. As Enkidu's final day came, the city grew quiet. Gilgamesh sat beside him, holding his friend's trembling hand. Do not leave me, he pleaded. We faced gods and monsters together. There must be more we can do. Enkidu's eyes grew distant, their blue turning to grey. Do not grieve too long, my brother, he whispered. You are not meant to follow me yet. Seek the secret that lies beyond death, and you will understand what even the gods cannot teach. His final breath escaped like wind through reeds, and the silence that followed was vast. Gilgamesh felt it press against his soul, a silence too deep to bear. When Enkidu's eyes finally closed, a great stillness settled over Uruk, as though the entire city mourned the wild man who had once defied the gods. Gilgamesh sat beside his friend's body for 7 days and 7 nights, refusing food or sleep. He touched Enkidu's face, expecting warmth, but found only the coldness of stone. He whispered his name again and again, but the silence did not break. Must you lie there forever? He murmured, voice cracking with disbelief. Must death take even you? The once mighty king of Uruk wept like a child. His tears soaked the earth, and his cries echoed through the palace halls. The servants dared not enter. Even the priests watched from afar, fearful of disturbing grief, so fierce it seemed divine. On the 7th day, Gilgamesh saw a maggot crawl from Enkidu's nostril, and something within him shattered. He rose, his hair dishevelled, his eyes hollow and haunted. If this is the fate of all men, he said to the empty chamber, then what is the point of greatness? What is the meaning of power if even heroes decay? He fled from the city gates, leaving behind his throne, his crown, and his people. He wrapped himself in animal skins and wandered the wilderness like a madman, driven by the terror of mortality. The forests whispered, and the rivers seemed to mock him with their endless flow. There must be a way, he muttered to the night. Someone must have escaped death. I will find him. The stories of old spoke of a man named Utnapishtim, the one who had survived the great flood and been granted immortality by the gods. Gilgamesh's mind clung to that name like a drowning man to driftwood. He has the answer, he whispered. He has walked where death cannot follow. So he began his journey eastward, across deserts and mountains, through lands scorched by the sun and forests heavy with the scent of decay. He no longer looked like a king, but a spectre, his body scarred, his feet bleeding, his eyes aflame with a desperate light. He spoke to no one, ate little, and feared nothing but time itself. Every step was driven by one question that haunted him beyond reason. If the gods could grant one man eternal life, why not him? And so began Gilgamesh's descent not into glory, but into obsession. Through Gilgamesh wandered through lands where no man dared to tread. His body hardened by hunger and sleepless nights, his heart hollowed by grief. He crossed valleys of ash where no birds sang and mountains whose peaks tore the clouds like blades. The world around him seemed drained of color, as if life itself recoiled from his restless search. One night, beneath a sky heavy with unblinking stars, he came upon a valley of stone guarded by scorpion-men creatures, half human, half beast, their eyes burning with the fire of the sun's first dawn. Their tails coiled like serpents, and their voices rumbled like thunder. When they saw him approach, they lowered their stingers in warning. "No mortal may pass," said one, his voice echoing off the cliffs. "Beyond this gate lies the path of Shamash, where the sun travels beneath the world. It is the road of death, and no living man has crossed it and returned." Gilgamesh fell to his knees, his words breaking from his throat like a prayer. "I have walked with death. I have held my brother as his spirit fled. I seek only the one who has conquered Utnapishtim, the immortal man." The scorpion man studied him for a long moment, the glow of his eyes dimming with something like pity. "Your journey will strip you of everything that remains human," he said, "even your hope." But he stepped aside, and the gates of stone opened with a sound like a mountain cracking. Gilgamesh entered the tunnel where the sun sleeps, and darkness swallowed him whole. He walked for what felt like an eternity, unable to tell night from day. The silence pressed against him like a weight, broken only by the echo of his footsteps. Sometimes he thought he heard Enkidu's laughter behind him, soft and fleeting, and when he turned, there was nothing but shadow. His hands bled from the jagged rock walls, his breath grew thin, and yet he pressed onward. Finally, a faint glow appeared in the distancy glimmer of dawn after endless night. He stumbled toward it, emerging into a world bathed in gold, where the air shimmered with the scent of life renewed. There, beyond the edge of the tunnel, stretched the garden of the gods, a land where trees bore jewels instead of fruit, and rivers ran with pure light. But for Gilgamesh, beauty meant nothing. He sought only truth, and truth, he knew, would demand another price. Realms where the boundary between man and myth blurred like mist before dawn. The garden of the gods shimmered in stillness, a place untouched by decay or sorrow. Jewels hung from branches like stars caught in daylight, and the air was thick with the scent of life so pure it felt unreal. Gilgamesh stumbled through it, his mortal body filthy and torn, a ghost amid perfection. He drank from a stream that glowed like molten silver, and for a moment warmth returned to his limbs. But rest eluded him. The whispers of the gods rustled through the leaves, soft and cold. "Why do you come here, child of clay?" They seemed to murmur. "This place is not for those who grieve." Still, he pressed onward until he found a woman sitting by the shore of a radiant Cesaduri, the tavern keeper of the gods, her eyes calm as twilight. When she saw Gilgamesh's ragged form, she gasped. "Who are you that walks the path of the sun?" she asked. "No mortal crosses the tunnel of night." Gilgamesh fell to his knees before her. "I am Gilgamesh, king of Uruk. I seek Utnapishtim, the one who has escaped death. My friend has died, and I cannot bear to follow him into that silence." Sudiri regarded him with sorrow. "Gilgamesh," she said softly, "you chase a shadow. The life you seek is not meant for men. The gods have kept immortality for themselves. What remains to mortals is to live fully before death comes." Her words struck him like stone, yet he shook his head violently. "No, I will not accept it. I will not rest until I have looked upon Utnapishtim and learned his secret." Sudiri sighed, her voice filled with both pity and warning. "Very well. If your heart cannot turn back, then find Yershanabi, the ferryman of Utnapishtim. He guards the waters of death. But beware no living hand may touch those waters and survive." Gilgamesh bowed in gratitude and left her behind, her gaze following him like a mother watching a child run toward the storm. He wandered through forests where the air shimmered with heat and came at last to a shore where a boat rested among the reeds. There stood Yershanabi, tall and solemn, his oars carved with ancient runes. When Gilgamesh spoke of his purpose, the ferryman's eyes darkened. "Many have sought the Immortal One," he said. "None have returned. But if you are determined, then you will help me cut poles for the crossing 300 in Orland when they are gone. Only your strength will decide whether you live or die." For days, Gilgamesh worked beside Yershanabi, beneath a sun that never seemed to set, felling trees and carving poles with his bare hands until his skin split and bled. The ferryman watched in silence, saying nothing of pity or praise. When at last the final pole was cut, they loaded the boat and set out across the waters of Death Sea, so still it seemed made of glass, reflecting nothing, swallowing no sound. The air above it was cold and empty, and Gilgamesh could feel its hunger in his bones. "Remember," Yershanabi warned, "you must not let the waters touch your flesh, not even a drop." With steady arms, Gilgamesh thrust the first pole into the sea, the wood hissing faintly as if the water burned it from within. One by one, he cast them aside, pushing the boat forward through endless silence. Each pole dissolved into black dust once it left his grip, and the journey felt like eternity compressed into motion. He lost count of time, of breath, of thought. Only the endless expanse remained. When the final pole crumbled away, Gilgamesh's hands trembled with exhaustion. "Now what?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Yershanabi looked toward the horizon, his face unreadable. "Now, mighty king, use the strength that remains. Push with your cloak. With your will let the gods see how far a man will go to deny his end." Gilgamesh obeyed, dipping his torn cloak into the void, propelling the boat with desperate force. The water hissed at the touch, eating away at the fabric until only tatters remained, yet somehow they moved forward. Then, at last, a shadow appeared, in the distance an island wreathed in mist, still and silent. As they drew near, Gilgamesh saw an old man seated upon the shore beside a woman whose eyes were as deep as time itself. His heart raced. "Is that him?" he whispered. Bershanabi nodded. "That is Utnapishtim, son of the flood, whom the gods made eternal." The boat touched ground, and Gilgamesh stepped onto the sand, his legs weak, his spirit trembling. The air here was heavy with the scent of rain long past, and every grain beneath his feet seemed older than the world itself. He approached the figure and spoke with a voice that was no longer that of a king, but of a man broken open by wonder. "Tell me," he said, "how did you escape the fate that claims us all?" Utnapishtim looked up slowly, his face lined like weathered stone, eyes calm as the sea before a storm. He studied Gilgamesh in silence, as though reading the exhaustion carved into his skin, the grief that clung to him like a second shadow. "You are far from home, king of Uruk," he said at last, his voice deep and distant. "Few have come this far. Fewer still have returned." Gilgamesh fell to his knees before him. "I have seen my brother die," he said. "I have walked through darkness and across the waters of death. I will not rest until I know the secret that the gods gave to you, the secret of eternal life." Utnapishtim regarded him with quiet sorrow. "You seek what cannot be found," he said. "Even I did not seek it. It was given to me once, and it will never be given again." Gilgamesh clenched his fists. "Then tell me how it happened. Tell me what you saw when the gods chose to save you." The old man nodded slowly and turned his gaze toward the horizon. "Long ago," he began, "the world was not as you see it now. The gods dwelt among men, and their voices thundered across the plains. But the hearts of men grew loud and restless, and their clamor rose up like smoke, disturbing the sleep of the heavens. Enlil, the storm god, could bear no more. He gathered the divine assembly and said, 'Let us wipe them from the earth with a flood.' Yet one among them, Ea, the god of wisdom, took pity. He whispered to me through the walls of my house, saying, 'Man of Shuruppak, build a vessel of reeds and pitch. Take with you the seed of all living things, for the waters will come to destroy everything that breathes.' Utnapishtim's eyes darkened with memory. I obeyed, though I did not yet understand. For 6 days and nights I built the ark as Ea commanded. When the flood came, the world vanished beneath the sea. Even the gods trembled at their own power, and Ishtar wept for what she had unleashed. When at last the waters receded, I released a dove, then a swallow, and finally a raven, which did not return. The earth was reborn, and I offered sacrifice to the gods. They granted me and my wife immortality not as a gift, but as a burden to remain forever apart from mankind, watching as all things fade." Gilgamesh listened, his breath caught between awe and despair. The story hung in the air like incense, heavy, sacred, and cruel. "So," he said softly, "you were chosen. But tell me, Utnapishtim, why can it not happen again? Why must I, who have suffered more than any man, be denied what you were granted?" Utnapishtim regarded him with something like pity. "Because the order of the world does not bend to longing," he replied. "The gods act once and seal their will with silence. To ask for what was never meant for you is to tear at the fabric of what holds life together." But Gilgamesh's desperation only deepened. "Then test me," he demanded. "Show me that I am unworthy. Let me prove that man can endure what even the gods fear." Utnapishtim sighed, a long, tired sound. "Very well," he said. "If you wish to test yourself, stay awake for 6 days and 7 nights. Conquer sleep, the small death that visits every living thing, and you may begin to understand what immortality means." Gilgamesh nodded fiercely, determined, and sat upon the shore, his back straight, his eyes wide. The waves whispered softly, and the sky turned dark. But no man can outlast the rhythm of the world. Within moments, his eyelids grew heavy, and before he could curse his weakness, he fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. Utnapishtim's wife, watching from afar, smiled gently. "Look," she said, "the great king sleeps already." Her husband nodded. "Mark each day that passes. Set a loaf of bread beside him, one for each day." So she did. The first loaf was fresh, the second stale, the third molded, and by the seventh the bread had decayed to dust. When Gilgamesh finally stirred, the air was filled with the scent of rot and salt. He blinked, confused, and looked at the loaves beside him. "You were sleeping," Utnapishtim said softly. "You, who would conquer death, could not conquer sleep. See how the bread bears witness. You have already decayed, even in rest." Gilgamesh lowered his head, his strength drained. "Then it is true," he whispered. "Man was made to die." But Utnapishtim's wife, moved by compassion, spoke gently to her husband. "If he cannot have eternity, let him take something back, a sign, a reminder that life itself is still sacred." Utnapishtim thought for a moment and then turned once more to the broken king. "There is a plant," he said, "that grows in the deep waters. It can restore youth. Retrieve it, and perhaps you will find what you seek." Hope flickered once more within Gilgamesh, fragile but alive. He followed Utnapishtim's words, his eyes glimmering with the desperate light of a man who has glimpsed salvation. Utnapishtim led him to the edge of the sea where the waters churned thick and black, concealing depths older than time itself. "There," the immortal said, pointing toward the horizon where the sun bled into the water. "At the bottom lies the plant. It is guarded by the currents of the deep and the silence of the abyss. Tie stones to your feet, sink beneath the waves, and seize it before your breath runs out. But remember, what you take from death must be held carefully, for death is always watching." Gilgamesh nodded and fastened stones to his ankles. Without hesitation, he plunged into the dark water. The cold struck him like a hammer, stealing his breath. But he kept descending, deeper and deeper, through a world where no sound existed. His lungs burned, his mind screamed. Yet his hands searched through the silt until they touched something sharp and living, a stem. Thorned and trembling, glowing faintly like a star buried beneath the world. He tore it free and kicked upward with all his strength, the stones slipping loose as he broke the surface, gasping. The plant clutched tight against his chest. He hauled himself onto the shore, laughing for the first time since Enkidu's death. "I have it," he cried. "I have taken life from the waters of death." Utnapishtim watched with a faint smile. "So you have, but what will you do with it?" Gilgamesh held the plant gently, its scent rich and strange. "I will return to Uruk," he said. "I will share it with the elders of my city so that all may taste youth again. Then, when my people are renewed, I too will eat of it and live forever." Utnapishtim nodded but said nothing, and in his silence there lingered a sorrow too deep for words. Gilgamesh thanked him, boarded the boat with Yershanabi, and began the long journey home. As the shores of the immortal receded into mist, Gilgamesh felt the weight of his triumph settle into calm. The plant was his redemption, his proof that even men could outwit fate. Yet, as the boat drifted gently across the returning waters, the gods watched from the heavens in stillness, their eyes cold and knowing, for they had seen what men could never, that every victory earned against death comes with a shadow waiting to reclaim it. The journey back to Uruk was slow and quiet, the waters stretching endlessly around them. Gilgamesh sat with the plant cradled in his lap, guarding it as if it were a newborn child. Bershanabi rode in silence, occasionally glancing at his king, whose eyes were fixed on the horizon with the hunger of a man who had glimpsed eternity. Days passed. The wind grew gentler, the waves smaller, and the stars seemed closer. Each night, Gilgamesh dreamt of Enkidu walking beside him through the streets of Uruk, smiling and alive. He imagined presenting the plant to his people, watching the old become young, the weary become strong. He would be remembered not as a tyrant, but as a savior who stole the secret of the gods. When they finally reached the shores of his homeland, Gilgamesh's heart swelled with pride and purpose. He knelt beside a clear spring to wash himself before entering his city. The plant, he thought, must be cleansed as well before he shared it with his people. He placed it on a smooth rock beside the water and lowered himself into the pool, feeling the coolness wash away the dust of his journey. For the first time in years, he felt peace. But peace has teeth. From the shadows, a serpent slithered silently toward the scent of the sacred plant. Its scales shimmered like bronze in the sun, its eyes reflecting a knowledge older than mankind. While Gilgamesh bathed, the serpent coiled around the plant and swallowed it whole. When Gilgamesh turned, he saw the creature retreating into the reeds, its skin glowing with sudden radiance. Then, before his horrified eyes, the serpent shed its skin sleek, renewed, reborn, and vanished into the wilderness. Gilgamesh stumbled onto the shore, shouting, cursing the gods, the waters, and his own foolishness. He fell to his knees, clutching the empty stone where the plant had lain, tears streaming down his face. "For whom have I toiled?" he cried. "For whom have I suffered? I gained life only to see it devoured before my eyes." The air was still. No divine voice answered him. Only the soft whisper of the reeds and the distant hiss of the serpent fading into eternity. Gilgamesh bowed his head and wept, not as a king, but as a man who finally understood that no hand, no heart, and no hero could escape the quiet claim of time when the grief had spent itself. Gilgamesh rose from the banks of the river, older than when he had first left, though the sun above him had not moved an inch. His feet carried him back toward Uruk, each step a reminder of what he had lost, but also of what he had learned. The road was familiar, yet it felt changed, as if every stone, every whisper of wind carried a secret that had been waiting for him to return. When he reached the great walls of Uruk, the guards saw not a king cloaked in divine pride, but a wanderer cloaked in silence. The people ran to greet him, their eyes wide with questions, but Gilgamesh only raised his hand and walked past them toward the temple of Ishtar. He climbed to the highest terrace and looked out over his city, the brick walls, the gleaming towers, the rivers curling like silver threads around the land. "Behold," he whispered, "this is what endures." The realization settled deep within him, though the flesh may fade. The hands that build, the minds that dream, and the hearts that strive leave their echo behind. He ordered his scribes to record his story, every triumph, every failure, every tear, not as a tale of a god-king, but as the testament of a man who had sought immortality and found wisdom instead. At night, he sat alone, watching the stars, feeling Enkidu's presence beside him as if the wild man had never left. Sometimes he spoke aloud, sharing his thoughts with the empty air. "I could not keep death from him, nor from myself," he murmured, "but I have carved his name in clay." He will live as long as a single voice remembers. And in those moments, the wind seemed to answer, brushing against his skin with a warmth that felt almost like forgiveness. As the days turned to years, Gilgamesh ruled Uruk with patience and humility. The once restless conqueror became a teacher, guiding his people not through fear, but through understanding. His city prospered, his story spread, and his name became legend. Yet beneath that legend was a man who had walked to the edge of existence and returned with the quiet truth that even in lost, there is something unbreakably spirit that neither serpent nor death can consume. In the quiet years that followed, Uruk shimmered like a jewel of baked clay and gold beneath the endless Mesopotamian sky. Travelers from distant kingdoms came to marvel at its walls that stretched like the horizon itself, walls built by the same hands that had once defied the gods. Gilgamesh would often stand upon them at dusk, the wind lifting his hair, his gaze lost beyond the Euphrates, where the setting sun turned the world to molten amber. He no longer searched for gods or secrets beyond the stars. Instead, he searched within the place he had always feared to look. The city thrived, and his people spoke of peace and prosperity. But Gilgamesh carried within him a stillness that only those who have known despair can understand. The priests would tell him that the gods had rewarded him for his suffering, that Uruk's abundance was proof of divine favor, but Gilgamesh no longer spoke of the gods. He had seen too much of their silence to worship their names with unshaken faith. Instead, he honored life itself, the laughter of children echoing through the courtyards, the scent of wet clay after rain, the touch of a friend's hand in passing. Sometimes, in the deep of night, he would wake and think he heard Enkidu's footsteps on the palace floor. He would turn toward the darkness and whisper, "My brother, I built these walls for you." Yet there were moments when the memories became too heavy, when the ghost of loss pressed against his chest until he could hardly breathe. On those nights, he would walk barefoot through the gardens, past the lilies and palms, until he reached the temple steps. There he would kneel and touch the cold stone, not in prayer, but in remembrance. For he knew that all things, kings and beasts, rivers and mountains, eventually yield to the same quiet dust. But he also knew something deeper, that the stories carved into that dust would outlast the flesh that made them. He had become both builder and myth, the man who sought eternity and found it not in the heavens, but in the heartbeat of his own creation. Uruk itself had become his immortality, and every sunrise over its walls was a whisper that he had, in some way, conquered death. Time continued its slow procession through the streets of Uruk, carrying with it the fading echo of Gilgamesh's footsteps. The king, once restless and fierce, now moved with the gravity of a man who had come to understand the fragility of his own existence. Seasons changed, and the mighty Euphrates rose and fell as it always had, indifferent to the lives built along its shores. Gilgamesh spent his final years walking among his people, no longer as a distant ruler, but as a storyteller, a keeper of memory. He would sit in the marketplace, surrounded by children who listened with wide eyes as he spoke of the wild man from the forest, of the cedar mountains and the sky bull, of gods who tested mortal hearts. His voice carried through the alleys like the murmur of an ancient wind. And though many of his listeners did not fully understand the depth of his sorrow, they felt the weight of his truth. He often told them that courage was not found in victory, but in facing loss and rising again. The gods, he would say, may grant life or death as they wish, but meaning that is ours to build. As his hair turned white and his strength waned, Gilgamesh withdrew more often to the temple walls. where he watched the river gleam like molten glass under the moon. He knew his time was nearing its end. One evening, as the stars began to appear, he summoned his scribes. "Write it all," he said softly. "Every word, every failure, every dream. Let no part of my story be forgotten." And they wrote on clay tablets that would survive fire and time. The story of a king who could not escape mortality, but who, through his suffering, became eternal. When Gilgamesh finally lay upon his bed, the city was silent. The torches burned low. Those who stood beside him swore they saw him smile. In his final breath, he whispered Enkidu's name, and then, as the first light of dawn touched the horizon, the king of Uruk closed his eyes. The city mourned, but Uruk did not fall. Its walls stood tall, and in them was carved the echo of his life, the promise that no death could erase what the human spirit could build. Remember and dream. Long after Gilgamesh was gone, Uruk remained its ziggurats piercing the horizon like stairways to forgotten gods, its markets alive with voices that carried the faint memory of his name. The scribes who had once served him guarded the clay tablets that told his tale, pressing each symbol into the soft earth before the fire hardened it into immortality. Centuries passed, dynasties rose and fell, empires swallowed one another, and the desert winds carried away the names of kings and conquerors. Yet the story of Gilgamesh endured. It slipped through time like a whisper, surviving floods, wars, and the silence of the ages. In distant lands, travelers spoke of a king who sought life beyond death, who wrestled the wild and walked among gods, who returned to teach mankind the cost of wisdom. Scholars in later ages would unearth the fragments of his legend buried beneath layers of dust and ruin. They would piece them together like broken mirrors, trying to see the reflection of a man who lived 6,000 years before their own time. Some would call it myth, others memory. Some would say that Gilgamesh was never meant to be a man at all, but the voice of every human heart that has ever feared the darkness beyond the grave. When the first archaeologists brushed the dirt from the tablets in the ruins of Nineveh, they found not just words, but the pulse of something ageless, a voice that still trembled with longing, still cried out against the final silence. There is no permanence. The tablets seemed to sigh, but there is story, and that was enough. Across the centuries, Gilgamesh became both legend and mirror. He stood at the edge of time, reminding humanity that power fades, kingdoms crumble, and even love turns to dust, but the search for meaning never ends. Every age has its Gilgamesh, every soul its Enkidu. They walk the same path, from innocence to loss, from arrogance to awakening. The echoes of their footsteps still linger in every question we ask of the universe. And perhaps that is immortality, not the body, not the crown, but the endless retelling of a name whispered against eternity. The king who could not escape death became the story that death could not erase. So now, as we close the final tablet of the Epic of Gilgamesh, listen to the silence that follows, the kind of silence that holds the echo of everything that has ever been said. The wind that once moved through the walls of Uruk still moves through us, carrying the same questions Gilgamesh asked beneath the ancient sun. What does it mean to live, to love, to lose? What remains of us when our footsteps fade from the earth? Sit back, let your eyes grow heavy, and imagine the slow heartbeat of that old world of temples glowing under starlight, of reeds swaying beside the Euphrates, of a man once called 2/3 God and 1/3 human standing before the dawn, realizing at last that the gods he feared were never his true masters. Gilgamesh found no magic, no divine fruit to cheat death. Yet he found something far greater, the understanding that life, however brief, is made sacred by the moments we dare to feel it. His walls still stand in the dust of Iraq, crumbled yet proud, and the story carved upon them has outlived every empire that once believed itself eternal. It is the oldest story we know, older than the Bible, older than Homer, and yet it feels as if it was written for us, for the hearts that still break, for the hands that still reach for something beyond the dark. Each night, when the stars burn quietly above the sleeping world, perhaps Gilgamesh still walks between them, not as a king, not as a god, but as a reminder that humanity itself is the great adventure. Some say his soul lingers on the banks of the river, watching as modern men and women chase their own forms of immortality through fame, wealth, machines, and memories. But the story tells us that immortality is not what lasts forever. It's what leaves an imprint deep enough that others can feel it long after we're gone. So tonight, as you drift towards sleep, remember the king who could not rest until he understood why life must end. Remember Uruk, its stones whispering beneath the sands. And remember that every breath, every heartbeat, every fleeting joy is its own small victory against oblivion. The story ends, but the search for meaning, for love, for eternity never truly does.